In the sultry heat of a Rhodesian spring day in November 1965, Ian Smith, the battle-hardened former Royal Air Force pilot who had become Prime Minister, addressed a tense nation from the steps of Parliament in Salisbury. With a firm voice carrying the resolve of a people who felt betrayed by their colonial motherland, he proclaimed the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI. The white minority government of southern Rhodesia sought to chart its own course, resisting what it perceived as Britain's push for hasty black majority rule that could destabilize the prosperous, orderly society it had built. The global backlash was immediate and fierce. Britain, under Prime Minister Harold Wilson, orchestrated diplomatic isolation. The United Nations, viewing the regime as a threat to peace, imposed sanctions. What began as voluntary measures in 1965 hardened into mandatory economic sanctions under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter in December 1966 and April 1968. This was unprecedented, the first time the world body attempted a full-scale economic stranglehold on a breakaway state. The impact on Rhodesia was profound. Its diversified economy, anchored by lucrative tobacco exports, booming mining operations, and a growing manufacturing sector, faced sudden suffocation. Ports in Mozambique and South Africa became critical choke points as international shipping lines shied away. Oil supplies were embargoed, forcing fuel rationing and imaginative conservation efforts. International flights were cancelled, leaving the landlocked nation more isolated. For everyday Rhodesians, both black and white, the years brought hardships, empty supermarket shelves, makeshift repairs, and a spirit of defiance-fueled innovation. Local factories retooled to manufacture goods previously imported. Farmers experimented with new crops and livestock to replace lost tobacco revenues. But it was the mineral riches buried in the ancient geological formations of the Highveld Plateau that offered the most potent weapon for survival. Chief among them was chrome ore, or chromite. Rhodesia boasted some of the finest chromite deposits on Earth, characterized by exceptional quality. At the time of UDI, the country ranked as the world's third-largest producer, trailing only the Soviet Union and South Africa. The ore's high chromium-to-iron ratio, combined with minimal impurities, made it ideal for producing ferrochrome and specialized steels. These materials were indispensable for stainless steel manufacturing, high-temperature superalloys used in jet engines, and durable components for military vehicles and armor plating. Before sanctions, Rhodesia exported hundreds of thousands of tons yearly, with a significant portion heading to American steel mills hungry for reliable, high-grade supplies. United Nations Security Council resolutions, particularly 232 and 253, specifically prohibited the import of Rhodesian products, including chromite, ore, and ferroalloys. Compliance was expected from all member states. The United States, a key architect of the post-war international order, initially adhered strictly. Imports that had been worth about $5 million annually in 1965, equivalent to tens of millions in today's dollars, ground to a halt. American companies scrambled to alternative sources, dramatically increasing reliance on the Soviet Union. By 1968, the USSR supplied as much as 69% of US chrome imports. This shift alarmed Cold War strategists in Washington. Chrome was classified as a strategic and critical material essential for national defense, with government stockpiles maintained for emergencies. Depending on a geopolitical adversary for such a vital resource posed unacceptable risks, especially amid ongoing tensions. Behind the scenes, powerful American interests with long-standing connections to Rhodesia mobilized. Corporations like Union Carbide, which operated large chrome mining and processing facilities in the country, and Foot Mineral Company exerted subtle but effective pressure through lobbying channels. They emphasized the economic harm to US industries and the strategic folly of enriching Moscow. Political allies emerged in Congress, particularly among Southern Democrats and conservatives. Senator Harry F. Byrd Jr. of Virginia, a vocal opponent of rapid decolonization and sympathetic to Rhodesia's anti-communist posture, played a leading role in crafting legislative relief. The legislative breakthrough materialized in 1971. Tucked into the Military Procurement Authorization Act was Section 503, famously known as the Byrd Amendment. Its wording was strategically crafted. It prevented the US government from banning the importation of any strategic material from a non-communist country as long as the same material was being imported from communist nations. Because Soviet chrome continued to flow into American ports, this provision effectively nullified the UN sanctions for Rhodesian chrome within US jurisdiction. President Richard Nixon, navigating complex domestic and foreign policy waters, signed the bill into law on November 17, 1971. Legal imports resumed on January 1, 1972. The announcement reverberated across the Atlantic. In Salisbury, Ian Smith and his cabinet celebrated it as a major psychological and economic victory. Local newspapers proclaimed it a wonderful boost, signaling cracks in the international blockade. Rhodesian businesses anticipated renewed foreign exchange earnings crucial for sustaining the economy. Conversely, in the United States, the move drew sharp criticism from civil rights advocates and African-American congressmen, notably Representative Charles Diggs of Michigan, who saw it as a tacit endorsement of white minority rule. The United Nations Security Council responded with Resolution 314 in 1972, condemning the U.S. action as a violation of international obligations. In the landmark court case Diggs versus Schultz, American judges acknowledged the conflict with UN commitments but affirmed that U.S. domestic law took precedence. The chrome trade exploded back to life. Within the first 7 months of 1972, substantial shipments, millions of dollars worth, docked at U.S. ports. Over the full duration of the Byrd Amendment from 1972 to 1977, American imports of Rhodesian chrome or ferrochrome, nickel, and associated minerals totaled around $212 million. At its height, Rhodesia accounted for up to 17% of U.S. chrome imports. These were not shadowy operations alone. While evasion networks thrived, the amendment provided a semi-open pathway that bolstered legitimacy and volume. Cargo often traveled via rail to South African or Mozambican ports, with documentation that cleverly obscured origins through third-party certifications. This resurgence represented far more than commercial transactions. It embodied a calculated act of strategic defiance against the global order. Rhodesian intelligence and economic ministries had meticulously planned for sanctions evasion from the outset of UDI. Techniques included forged certificates of origin, multi-layered shipping routes, and partnerships with friendly entities in neighboring territories. The direct U.S. market access via the Byrd Amendment injected desperately needed hard currency into the Treasury. These funds supported critical imports of petroleum products, spare parts, and modern weaponry components as the guerrilla war intensified in the bush. On the ground in Rhodesia's mining heartlands, such as the districts around Selokwe and Gwelo, the impact was tangible and invigorating. Massive open-pit excavations and deep underground shafts operated with renewed vigor under the relentless African sun. Teams of African laborers, supervised by experienced white mining engineers, drilled, blasted, and hauled the dense, dark chromite ore. Convoys of trucks and trains snaked toward railheads, their loads destined for distant smelters. In contrast, American industrialists in Pittsburgh and other steel towns breathed easier with secure supplies of premium material that reduced processing costs and enhanced product quality. The Soviet Union saw its pricing power and market share erode. For the Rhodesian regime, this chrome lifeline extended its ability to withstand isolation. The Byrd Amendment was not a random quirk of American politics but a manifestation of deeper Cold War realpolitik. The Nixon White House, while rhetorically aligned with broader Western sanctions against Rhodesia, prioritized pragmatic national interests. Strategic minerals like chrome were deemed too important to sacrifice on the altar of perfect multilateral compliance. Rhodesian ore stood out for its technical superiority. Higher chromium content translated to more efficient smelting, superior alloy performance, and reliability in high-stress applications. U.S. metallurgical tests repeatedly validated its advantages, even as diplomatic channels expressed disapproval. Key corporate players facilitated the revival. Union Carbide's extensive pre-UDI capital investments in Rhodesian chrome operations allowed for quick scaling of extraction and local ferrochrome production. This not only generated export revenue but also nurtured Rhodesia's secondary industries, creating a more self-reliant economy. From 1972 through 1976, these mineral exports helped compensate for devastated tobacco sales and other sanctioned commodities, maintaining overall economic output and employment levels higher than skeptics had forecast. Sanctions busting reached sophisticated heights. Rhodesian operatives cultivated elaborate international networks involving shell companies in neutral European jurisdictions, creative transshipment points, and falsified manifests. South Africa, never a full participant in the sanctions regime, served as a vital conduit, while Portuguese-controlled Mozambique provided port access until the Carnation Revolution in 1974. Although indirect routes handled much of the trade, the Byrd Amendment's U.S. channel offered a more straightforward, higher volume artery that minimized risks and maximized profits for the regime. Back home, the chrome windfall had strategic military implications. As the Rhodesian Bush War escalated in the mid-1970s, with ZANU and ZAPU insurgents launching cross-border raids, the government channeled resources into defense. Foreign currency from chrome enabled purchases of fuel for the Air Force's Hawker Hunters and Alouette helicopters, spare parts for armored vehicles, and other essentials that kept the highly professional Rhodesian security forces operational. Despite being outnumbered, these forces earned a reputation for tactical brilliance and resilience, holding vast rural areas through a combination of firepower, intelligence, and adaptive counterinsurgency. Domestic and international opposition intensified over time. Black nationalist movements portrayed the American imports as a moral complicity in prolonging oppression. Within the US Congress, liberal lawmakers and the growing Congressional Black Caucus pushed repeated repeal attempts. The amendment weathered the Ford administration but met its end under President Jimmy Carter. Elected in 1976 on a platform emphasizing human rights, Carter supported legislation in 1977 that repealed the Byrd Amendment, restoring full alignment with UN sanctions. Rhodesian chrome imports to the US halted, delivering a fresh economic shock. Even so, the half-decade of resumed trade had delivered irreplaceable value. It bought time for the regime, allowing economic adaptations like import substitution industries and agricultural diversification to mature. The breathing room arguably extended Rhodesia's unilateral independence by several critical years, shaping the trajectory of the liberation struggle and eventual negotiations. The story of Rhodesian chrome carries layers of historical irony and lessons on power dynamics. Here was a small, landlocked African nation, branded a pariah, successfully leveraging the foremost superpower, prime mover behind the United Nations itself, to undermine the sanctions architecture America had endorsed. It laid bare the tensions between idealistic international law and hard-edged national interests in a divided world. The humble chrome, or extracted from ancient serpentine rocks formed eons ago, transformed into a geopolitical lever. Its remarkable physical properties, exceptional resistance to heat, corrosion, and wear, mirrored the stubborn endurance of the Rhodesian experiment.